everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of Self Pub Sunday. Today is the Saturday edition, and we are joined by Daniel Barnett. If you've been watching my channel, you guys know how obsessed I am with the Nightmareland Chronicles series, so I'm so excited for this conversation. Thank you for joining us, Daniel.
Thanks for having me, Kate. It's really nice to be here. I appreciate you taking the time to read the series and have me on the chat about it.
Absolutely. So I thought I'd have an icebreaker question as folks kind of trickle in and get
Yeah.
settled down. So in your books, you write horror about nightmares. People's nightmares come to life. How do you get into that mindset to be able to write these books every day?
I mean, for me, the stories always start with um, my dog's got the odds too. Sorry. Uh, Stories always start with the characters for me. So um, everything kind of ends up building around that. I think that getting in the mindset to write anything usually comes down to, for me anyway, comes down to connecting with a particular moment in the story, and that is another way of saying kind of empathy. I guess is sort of the shorthand way to say it, but
Mhm.
I find that if I writing for me oftentimes starts like a day's writing for me oftentimes starts with just connecting to what the characters are feeling in that particular moment. I know that this isn't exactly an answer to your question. I don't know where the nightmares themselves come from in terms of I mean sometimes I guess I could say I mean some of the nightmares are there because I think they're cool, and some of them because I think they're weird, and some of them because I think they're cool and weird. Sometimes this the things that scare me a little bit or the things that like excite the horror fan in me, and then but in general really it all starts with the characters. So you'll see nightmares that grow as a natural extension um, to something a character is experiencing
Mhm.
or has experienced. You want the people who are confronting the nightmare to have it has to be like an interesting clash, right? Like
Yeah.
uh you just you want the friction that's created between the horrifying thing and the person experiencing the horrifying thing to be rich and to be rewarding in some way to help the character grow or to confront something or you know
Yeah.
um So I guess it's like a lot of different places. Specific ideas for him, I might be able to answer that more specifically if you have a question about a particular nightmare. Like, where did this one come from?
No,
Uh,
that's great. I just always wonder, especially in books that are so different than, your everyday life, how a writer can get their mind set in a way that they can sit down and write that on the page, how they can imagine that. So your
yeah,
answer is great.
totally. Yeah, I guess it just depends, and some days it's easier to get into the frame of mind than others. There's certain ways in which Nightmareland for me is like a welcome escape from you know the terrible shit in the real world that I have no control over.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's a way to sometimes put as horrifying as things are in the series, um, as dark as everything is, literally, figuratively. I still have the ability to as the author to tell a story that's like in large part about hope
Mhm.
in really terrible, uncertain times. And I don't have that like ability in real life necessarily to just decide that this is a hopeful thing when it's
Right.
terrible. So, it's just a way to explore the best and the worst of people, and bravery and courage and perseverance, and then things on the other side of the coin too. So
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk for a little bit about your writing career.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
have you always wanted to be a writer, or was there a particular moment in your life that you thought, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I'm a great cliche in that regard. I mean, I spent a lot of time reading growing up, and like a ton of time. And then but it wasn't until I read, and I had even written, I had written some short stories and stuff, little fan fiction things. I'd had like some like a short book published in the school library, but I never really thought of um, being a writer until I read it,
Mm.
and it was just something that clicked for me at that point in time. Something about what you're able to do with stories, the way he King puts these characters that feel like real people in extraordinary circumstances and tests them, and um, it's a very humanist kind of approach to his horror writing that just felt so limitless to me in terms of potential. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, if I can affect anybody a fraction of the amount that he affected me with this book, that book, that's what I wanted to do. And that happened near the end of high school. I wrote a couple bad books before I wrote my first decent book, and then at this point in time, I have um, three standalone novels out. One of them I pulled because I rewrote it this
Mm.
last summer, so it's kind of rebuilt from the ground up, but in a brand new stage of revisions. And then I got started on the Nightmareland Chronicles. Uh, I guess I want to say it was like 2018 or 2019, probably, or maybe even a little earlier. It was at least 2018.
Mhm.
Um, could have been 2007. I'm drawing a blank, but in any case, I got started on the Nightmareland Chronicles, and I wrote the first 5 books before releasing the first of them. And that's kind of what I'm doing with the second half now, which is just trying to get myself ahead enough.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because I have to change things. you know.
So you mentioned Stephen King. Are there any other writing inspirations that you have, especially when you're working on Nightmareland Chronicles?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, um, can go. Shirley Jackson. Um, I love Joe Hill, Clive Barker, Ramsey Campbell, and then like not even in the realm of horror, but like authors like Steinbeck and
Mm.
um, just so many, right? Like if I love good stories. It's at the end of the day, so I a good story is always going to be some form of inspiration.
Absolutely. I Shirley Jackson was my first introduction to horror. We had to read The Lottery in like middle school,
Yeah.
and I was like 13, and it terrified me. I had
Oh yeah.
nightmares like for the rest of that month, just dreaming of that happening in our little tiny hometown.
Yeah. Absolutely. I get it.
Um, so I want to talk spoiler free about Nightmareland Chronicles for people
Yeah.
that are watching this back that haven't gotten to it yet but are interested. So can you give us kind of your elevator pitch about what this series is about and why people?
Yeah. So the Nightmareland Chronicles is an adventure horror epic following one man's journey to reach his estranged daughter in a world claimed by eternal night. Lately, I've been kind of pitching it as The Last of Us meets The Dark Tower. The Last of Us was a great inspiration for this series, referring to the game specifically, actually, both games. And The Dark Tower, of course, John Hawthorne is looking for his daughter, and in a lot of ways, the destination of this blue house by the Atlantic Ocean is his proverbial Dark Tower. What's the right way to put it? I knew that I wanted a story with kind of a clear end destination in mind. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to end where and how we expect it, but based off of these things. But I like that overarching road novel. We have to reach this place that's impossibly far away, and it all goes back to Lord of the Rings, right? Like journey into Mordor,
Yeah.
And just that sense of adventure and excitement, juxtaposed against the horror and the found family elements, things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big draws for this, or wrapped into what this story is, I should say.
Yeah. So when I was reading the Nightmareland Chronicles, and especially the last couple books in this series, I saw different things in these books than I expected. I say with all of the love in my heart that it's more than just a horror series. And I found your books because of Leslie at the Nerdy Narrative, who's one of my best friends. And as I was messaging you on Twitter while I was reading, I was messaging Leslie, and she was waiting for me to get to certain moments in certain parts. And so Leslie will tell you that I'm relatively new to horror. She's the one that really got me into horror, but for me, Nightmareland Chronicles is more than just horror because, like you mentioned earlier, it has that element of hope in it, and it has moments of lightness even through the eternal darkness. I was wondering if you could speak on how you think Nightmareland Chronicles is different than other horror books or series out
there. I mean, horror is a big house, right? Like we've heard that kind of expression before. There's a lot of different rooms in the house, and you'll find some rooms that are a very degrading form of horror, or really claustrophobic, crushing, whatever. There's a lot of different stories to be told in the genre, and I think a lot of merit to all walks of horror stories. All I can say is, for me, the kind of stories that sit with me the most, the longest, get in the deepest, are the kinds of stories where there are characters you care about, and while horrible things do happen, at the heart of everything is just a good story. So it's my goal to write a good story with good characters, and if I succeed in that, that's up to the person reading to determine for them. So I mean, I think that really is it right there for me. Is I try to write the kind of I watch a movie or I read a book or I play a game like The Last of Us, and when that hits me in a way that something else hasn't hit me before, and um, and I want to recreate that feeling for someone else, the best that I can. Like
Yeah.
it's just I tell the kind of stories that I want to hear, and then the rest is just how people respond to it, and so.
Yeah, absolutely. So where did you get the idea for Nightmareland Chronicles from?
I wanted to write a big umbrella um, horror story, right? Like a big sprawling epic, a journey. And I had this idea about a world that was kind of cursed by some form of this like lasting night, right? And it took me a little while to sort of figure out how to or just find my own way forward through that story, because a story that's where the sun actually has gone out is going to be a pretty linear event. It's going to get colder and colder and colder, and then everybody's going to die. I don't want to tell that story. I don't want to tell a story that was um, for me would have been like what for me would have been it like shackled by science, so to speak. I wanted to tell a story where there are a set of rules, but they're a set of different rules than what we like traditionally expect. So there's an overarching mystery and things of that nature. But again, really, it starts with the characters, right? So like I couldn't start this story until I started to find some of the characters that would be the most interesting people to follow through a world like this. And so it had to grow from a couple different directions before I could start it, and then it continued to grow a lot as I worked through those early volumes. And um, you have some landmarks in mind, and then sometimes those landmarks change, or sometimes new ones pop up that you didn't expect, and it's a journey. I mean, it's a long story, but I wanted to tell a big, fun, scary, exciting, sad um, adventure.
Yeah. I think you hit all of those marks.
Thank you.
So what do you want your readers, or what do you hope your readers take away after reading Nightmareland Chronicles?
I hope it sits. I mean, like I want to tell a story that people remember, they think about. Um, you know, I want them to care about the characters and to care what happens to them, and to be along for that journey. That's what I'm in it for. In terms of outside my own personal. I'm like first I'm telling this story to myself, right?
Right.
But yeah, I guess what I want a reader to take from it, it's just like it's a. I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that, or maybe the answer is really simple. I want them to have a good time ultimately. Yeah. I want them to be glad that they picked up this story. I want the story to stick around with them. As for like a specific emotion or whatever, I mean, it's the thing with a story of this size is I want people to feel a lot of different emotions, right?
Absolutely.
Like, be surprised by them a little bit occasionally at times too.
Yeah. Well, I can say that when I started Nightfall, I read the first 2 sentences to my partner, who's not a reader at all. I was trying to explain what the book was, And I was like, my words are not doing this justice. I can't fully explain what's going on here. So let me just read this to you. I was trying to explain to him the beauty of the opening of your series. And after reading the first two sentences to him, now as I go through this series, I have to not only, update my followers on BookTube of my progress, but I also have to update him with the progress of the story. He's always like, what's happened to this character? What's happening now? What are you guys doing now?
That's cool.
So you've captured the heart of a non-reader also.
That's awesome. That means a lot.
So we talked spoiler free. Now I want to slide into some spoiler chat and
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
dig deep into this series. So for folks that are out there watching this, this is your warning for spoilers. If you haven't read this series yet, we're going to talk all the way up through the end of Lily, our book 6 in this series. So if you're not up to date yet on Nightmareland Chronicles and you don't want to be spoiled, this is your warning. Go and finish this series and then come back and watch the rest. But if you don't care about spoilers, or if you're like me and you're all caught up on the series and just dying for book 7 now, feel free to put your comments in the chat and we'll get to them as we come along. So Daniel, my favorite character in this series, I think, is Marcos. As soon as we met Marcos on the page, my heart immediately attached to him, and I said,
Yeah.
we need to protect this kid at all costs. Every time there was like something looming on the page, I was like, no, he cannot go there now. I was wondering, as the author, as the writer of this series, who is your favorite character, or who is the easiest character for you to write? Feel free to pass any of these questions too.
It depends. I mean, I think like I don't know if I have a favorite character, but they're all dearly important to me. Easiest to write kind of depends on the scene in question. I found almost all scenes with Maria and Marcos very easy to write. I thought that their relationship kind of became like defining for these first 6 books. Really kind of striking. Leslie, yeah. So yeah. I mean, and it just depends, right? Like they're all my favorites. It's like a lame answer, right? But I think the way that they grow together and play off of each other, and the opportunities that are afforded by potentially kind of unique dynamics, like at the beginning of the Flashlighters, John is kind of sidecard into being, or not sidecard, but like he's kind of delegated to the passenger seat of his own journey, and there's this element of like just changing power dynamics within the group, changing emotional dynamics. That was a lot of fun to explore. I think Maria's voice was oftentimes really easy for me to find. I think that I there's a lot of people with you on Marcos. I think that it's really when Marcos and Maria meet that the series really fully becomes its own, or like comes into its own. And I say that not just because that's where I felt that for myself as an author, that like something kind of clicked into place and I understood a lot of it. Marcos is kind of the moral heart, moral compass of the series, and I think that like the reviews also kind of reflect that too, right? Like Sleepwalking, they're all really pretty well reviewed, but Sleepwalking seem to kind of reflect the same degree of like the same amount, like that kind of connection, right, to the story.
It was kind of the first couple books, you thought you knew what this story was going to be, and then Marcos came into the picture and you saw what the true story was going to do.
Yeah, I think that's true, and in those first couple books, it's leaning heavily into mystery, right? Because there's a lot of crazy stuff happening, and if it were to have happened all at once, if we were to see nightmares within the first book, it would have been too busy and overwhelming, in my opinion. Which is why kind of the first book is dedicated to the reaction to night falling, and obviously, like in terms of like there's the internal what's going on with the characters, but in terms of the external thing, the world building, the progression, we have that first book. It's called Nightfall, and it's about the nightfall, right? And it's very immediate aftermath. And then the next book is called Lullaby, and it's about the lullaby. It's about that other shoe dropping. And then it's not really until Sleepwalking that we start to see how these pieces come together and what kind of picture they're forming, in terms of implications for the broader world and for what's to come. And then, the Flashlighters kind of introduces us to, like, more immediately to just like some of the nightmares that we might, that are out there. And then City of Blood takes it a little bit further and says, well, this is what a small city might look like, but it's different for everyone, because the nightmares are kind of governed by the fears, the collective fears of the people who live there. And it's hopefully there's just a lot of stories to tell in this world. I think I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Absolutely. So who is their hardest character for you to write?
This is kind of usually probably more like the answer to this question is, generally speaking, going to be more predicated on whether I'm, like, I guess the best way to put this is, no character is really hard to write if I'm in the moment with the story, right? It's when I start to think about like the next thing or the other thing or whatever. I think that there's a character in volume 7 named Lou Thibodeau that was kind of hard to write. It's just like really kind of like weeping portrait of, or self-pitying, kind of man who, he sucks. Lou sucks. He's not a good person, but he's sort of centered himself in his own head as the victim in every situation. And so there was some just kind of like finding the way through his own self-justifications and stuff, but like in an interesting way, because I also, and I hope this is reflected too, but like I don't like to kick low-hanging fruit, when I can help it. I mean, it's bound to happen in certain places, but I kind of operate under a rule of like characters should be interesting, and complex, like if at all possible, even like the shitty ones. So I don't like to like just be. So it's like, how do you take this character that's really just woeful and pitiable and kind of excrement in a lot of ways, but then also sort of make it interesting and fresh. Like say something new, or say something, at least say something old in a new way. You know, make there some sort of like find some central tragedy that, you know, is essential. It's just a lot. It's a lot more challenging to like try to find, you know, find sympathy with somebody who doesn't necessarily deserve it. Or I mean, it's just there's a lot of easy routes to take, and I think at the end of the day, I mean, you asked me this question all came from which characters are the hardest to write. That one kind of stands out. There are a lot of hard parts to write though in volume 7, and that was because it's like the beginning of a new story. So I'm also just like planting seeds and stuff along the way. I have a well, she's from the Midwest, but of, you know, Arab descent, a woman named Nura Samad in his new books that are you know, like in volume 7 and also going to be in volume 8 at least. And I certainly am, like, you know, given worldly affairs right now, kind of extra sensitive to my portrayal of this individual. But I don't necessarily think that means she's going to be hard to write.
Right.
It just depends. It really just depends. Usually when the writing gets hard, it's a reflection of me, and I have to step away from it for a while. But yeah.
So, thinking of the first 6 books, the first 6 volumes, do you have a favorite book?
Lily.
It's
I mean, like, I'm proud of all of them, but it's not close. Lily is the one. Lily is the book that I wanted to write when I started writing. Like, it's like, I think it's the closest I've ever come to like completely realizing what I wanted when I set out to write a book. You know.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of Lily. I think it's my best work.
It's a beautiful book, and you can see reading through the different volumes that Lily kind of took everything you learned from the first 5 and put it to work in that one book.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You know, it's built off of. Yeah, it's, you know, it's an emotional payoff. It's built for all of these books, for, you know, everything that's come before. It's built off of all of that because so many of the pieces are already set in place. You know, there's not like really a need to establish new pieces so much as just explore what's there.
Yeah.
It's a book that goes inward, you know, into, I think, like the you know, like an essential mystery to the series, which is like what's at the center of John, right? So it's the exploration of the main character, you know, like the deep exploration of the main character. It's a bit of a Wizard of Glass kind of situation. It's not as, you know, Wizard and Glass is like 90% flashback to like 10% forward progress. Lily is like an inverse of that, but the 10%
is so important.
Is the heart of the thing, in a lot of ways. So that look back at John's past with his brother in the Vermont wilderness, is just like, it's just so important for like who he is and why he makes the choices he does, and like the kind of essential paradox of him. You know, I think there's a line in there where, you know, it refers to, it's from Marshall's perspective. It's from Marshall's perspective, and it referring to John as the brutalized ideal of a man, or some brutalized ideal of a man. and it's just you have a feeling, right, when you're writing a book, like a feeling of what the book is, and that's oftentimes the most important thing in writing a story, is like holding on to that feeling, and it's not oftentimes anything you can fully define. But I will say, I think that like with Lily is it's like it is what I thought it was. It is what I felt it was, and that's why it's so important to me, I guess.
Yeah. For me, that letter from Marshall about their past and their childhood made John more of a character to get behind.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It was just, up until then, I was along for the ride with John because he was our main character and he was in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
But I didn't trust him at all. And I was there mostly for all of our other characters, and John was
Yeah,
just there.
that's fair. I mean, I think like it's just like that essential, there's like this like fundamental contradiction at the center of John, and it's wrapped in self-loathing. And I mean, I think comes down to that line. I think Marshall says something about, what would it do to you if the best thing you've ever done was also the worst thing, or the second worst, as it were. But John is I mean, yeah, no, and it's it's set up that way kind of by design, right? Like in terms of in terms of the structure of these first books, like you see John doing some pretty shitty things, or some before you ever see some of the other things too, and so it's just this, it's like this seesaw or something or other, where every time you think you get a little closer to the truth of him, and you're like, oh, he's terrible, fuck this guy, and then it's like, oh wait, no, something else, and then you're like, and then you're on the other side, and you're like, and then it swings back the other way. He's complex, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got a lot of different things going on.
He's more complex than I had originally thought.
I'll take it.
I never disliked John, but until Lily, or the end of City of Blood, when he went in to get Marcos.
Yeah.
I never. That was kind of the tipping point for when I actually started to like John as a character. We saw something more to him than just the hard exterior that he put up for the first 5 books.
Yeah, no, he's it's interesting to see, because I think like some readers really attached to Maria, some really attached to Marcos, some really attached to John, and there's a lot of, it's just fun to watch, I guess, to see who captures people's whatevers.
So what was the hardest book for you to write out of these 6?
It's probably Nightfall, followed by City of Blood. I think I had a period of burnout while I was writing City of Blood. I do remember that. But also there were periods of City of Blood that were really easy to write too. So it's probably Nightfall. The hardest is Volume 7, like 100%, I think. But Nightfall, of the first 6, Blind Spots is Volume 7 for reference. there was a lot, I was still determining, just so many things and like Nightfall kind of has this, it's I don't want to say it's spread thin, but um it kind of offers a little bit more of a panoramic view of things in this town. And then it has the first letter from Marshall that we read, which is again like one of two letters. But at that point in time, I was already, I needed to have that letter there to set up the letter that comes in Lily. I needed to establish a precedent for these really like longhand letters from this brother. So it didn't, so by the time we get to the real letter that matters, which is going to answer these things, it's not like a plot device. It feels like a part of Marshall's character and the way he processes their childhood. And as a, and, but like, it's, again, Nightfall is very much, there's just like that there's that chapter that has like 8 different little points of view in it, that it goes from like, it bounces from one to the other, and that was sort of there primarily for the clouds to set up the reveal of the moon at the end of the book. I just think like Nightfall is like probably it's a little bit more non-linear. Once you get this like small cast of characters established, these 2 or 3 people, and you put them out on the road and you get them in trouble somewhere, everything kind of like tightens in around the narrative becomes a little more straightforward. But Nightfall was just a little different. It just kind of, sort of started like this, it kind of comes in. So, and I was still figuring out the story, right? I was still figuring out who these characters were, who they are. Originally, I cut a side plot with Maria, that ended up being reworked into Sleepwalking later. And found a much better home there, and because it was on like that straight and forward path of the story, it was more appropriate there. But yeah, it was tricky, right? There was just a lot of pieces, a lot of things to juggle. Finding, everything that happens in Nightfall is really important. I don't know if people picked up on this, but like even the scene with John walking down the path, and he kills Nicholas Crowder. It's an act of mercy, right? And he sings that lullaby. But the guys, there's a reason the guy is shouting encore, and like in the particular in the scene when it takes place, the guy's shouting encore and clapping his hands, because it's tied to the sun, like it's tied to the disappearance of the sun, and there's this, the guy's gone crazy. But that particular refrain of encore, encore, encore is actually intended to mirror and or foreshadow the fact that John killed his own son. So he's killing this boy, and it's for different reasons and different circumstances. But the idea there is there's this like emotional component of this horrible thing that he's done that he doesn't remember, but he doesn't. And this idea that like this isn't the first time he has exacted this kind of violence on a child of this age, or of their roughly this age. It's an encore. And so there's just all these little pieces you're finding a home for, and you're trying to find exactly like the right amount of pressure to put on, a particular scale. You don't want to like broadcast or forecast something too clearly that needs to, more time to cook, but you also need to really clearly establish certain things so that when the payoff comes later, it's earned. Um, and yeah. Nightfall
So,
was tricky.
oh God.
Oh no, I was just saying Nightfall was a little tricky, I guess, at
Yeah,
times.
I mean, the first book in a series is always going to be one of the hardest to write because you're just starting out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Nice.
Did you have a favorite scene or favorite scenes so far from the series?
The letter, the whole letter chapter, if I can say that.
Yeah.
I think scenes. Let's see. I like the shot glass of blood, but I wouldn't rank it as a favorite necessarily. I mean, I think there's a like anything with Maria and Marcos is a favorite for me. The burping competition in the car. A lot of them are in Lily. Some of them are in Sleepwalking. I think there's some stuff in there too. I think that John saving Marcos at the end of Volume 5 is another one. That little kind of unheard monologue he gives to Marcos at the end. I like a lot. But in general, it's Lily. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff in Lily that I had been waiting for a long time to write. By the time I got there, and getting there, meant a lot. There's a line in Lily about when John is looking back at Maria and Marcos asleep in the back seat, and in this moment, particularly Maria, and it's something about something in him turned and turned like the horizon once with him, like the horizon once turned with the sun. I always come back to that line.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was kind of like, obviously the sun and the disappearance of the sun is so integral to like the physical architecture of this story, but then finding an opportunity to like that where the emotional architecture of the story aligns so closely with the world, and just those you find those little moments, right? Like those are the ones. Those are the ones.
So, what were the hardest scenes for you to write?
Emotionally, or like took me the longest?
Both.
Okay, so uh the scene with the woman in the storm drain, for whatever reason, took me a really long time to write. I was really kind of like, I was like very much like a paragraph a day, if that, and then starting over and just finding my way forward through the first part of that. I don't know why I was having, and that was like a more of a me thing. Periodically throughout, there were scenes that were hard to write. Emotionally, it's hard to say because like the intensely, like Maria's final chapter I wrote in one sitting, but it was really hard to write because I knew it was the last one that we were going to have of her. But that emotional, the emotional clarity of the whole moment, knowing the way that her final moments in the series, she's not just passively being subjected to this violence. It's the way that it's what she does in those final moments to take all of the violence so that Marcos doesn't receive any of it.
Yeah.
Made it such a powerful statement for her character. when I say like emotional clarity, I mean I just like I understood exactly where she was in this moment.
Yeah.
Right there with her. And it was all about Marcos for her. It's all about Marcos. And I mean, we could take a moment here and look, she gets the clear fucking better of Gregory, and Gregory is a bad, bad man.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the gun doesn't fire when she does have that moment. And but she gets the goddamn better of him. She does. Like if the gun had fired, Gregory would have been dead. And she probably would have not survived the aftermath of that. And maybe Marcos wouldn't have survived the aftermath of that either, but she did. It's just like it's I don't know, it's like an emotional victory for her in there still too.
Yeah.
It's she's just there's so much of these first 6 books are about like that emotional connection that comes between her and Marcos.
Right.
And
she got to be a mom to Marcos, even though she didn't get to be a mom to her unborn baby.
Yeah, and she didn't even really want to be a mom period either. So there's it's it's interesting because I wanted to write a story. Oftentimes in these post-apocalyptic books, you have these, like it's not an old, or it's not a new refrain or new idea to have like the pregnant woman in the apocalypse, right? And then like the baby is like a symbol of hope. And I didn't want to write a story like that, where the idea of having a kid was appealing to the person who's pregnant,
right,
or the idea of keeping the child goes unchallenged. I didn't want the baby to be a suit of armor for her, but I also didn't want to do anything in a way that was cheap either too. That said, what inevitably ends up happening, what inevitably ended up happening is that I realized that she had successfully terminated the pregnancy, that it's just too easy of an end for a plot line that's from the beginning, right? So it's like a lot more interesting to see her come to acceptance about having the baby, but again, not in the way where like it's not like she doesn't try to do the natural thing, like which is
right.
to like at least in my mind, like a very natural thing. You don't want to bring a kid into a world like this, but at the end of the day, she comes to accept it, um, because she has to. But that's another reflection of her strength, is that she's able to, and is able to turn, find love, um, and that kind of be the governing thing at the end of the day. She's going to make it work because that's who she is.
Right.
It's not the future she wanted for herself.
Yeah. At one point in this series, and I can't remember which book this comes in, but I believe it's Maria's character that says, "If you leave me one thing, leave me love."
I think that's Father Ammon.
Oh, okay.
He's no, it's okay. I do think that is Father Ammon, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody is around and knows, but I think that's as he's losing his grasp on himself and memory with the dementia and everything like that. That's his kind of plea to any higher power, or just in general, like like if he's left with one thing only, he wants it to be that.
Yeah.
And Father Ammon is a character where, like, I'm not a religious person. I kind of reject organized religion and stuff, but this is when I talk about like kicking the low hanging fruit, like having this cult that looks like a scary cult be a scary cult is low hanging fruit in my mind. Oh, it's Mormon, right? Like, and I think it's a lot more interesting and surprising to um, find, have like a religious figure that actually ends up being a positive one, despite everything else. In a book like this, it's more challenging to find a way towards that, because it's so common for it to be the other thing, and it's so much easier to just be like, oh, scary, kooky. They lost their marbles. They turned themselves over into a cult because they all lost their mind, and they're dangerous, and they're an obstacle for our heroes to get over. And the reality of the situation with Father Ammon is it's very different than that. It's not the last time we'll explore organized religion in this series, or like how people use religion, or and it's my own little opportunity to explore what I think like true faith would look like, or looks like, like what it's supposed to be in my mind. And but in general, I just, I wanted to subvert expectations a little bit there. Everybody naturally is going to think that this group is going to be dangerous, and well, sure, they do turn out to be, but it's for a human reason and not for a reason of, that they got too caught up in the Old Testament or whatever.
Right. So you've talked about book 7. What can you tell us about the rest of this series?
Let me think. So there is going to be more main characters. We have 6 books left, and our group is down to Marcos and John, and there's a lot of room for new dynamics there in that group, and new kinds of characters to become a part of this journey. We're not talking a big group or anything like that, like another intimate whatever, but there's, let's see, I've explored a lot of non-traditional kinds of boogeyman monster things, and I wanted to explore one that's more traditional. Yeah, it's going to be a pretty big centerpiece in the next books, in this latter half of the series. I think I mean, do you have any specific questions about where, if you want to center me on a particular kind of curiosity sort of thing? I don't know.
Not in particular. I mean, you kind of answered, will we see Marshall and his bow? I mean, for me, I'm just curious and anxious to see where the story goes with John and Marcos.
Well, we will have answers about Marshall and Isaac, but not anytime soon. And there will be, I think it's a book. There's an opportunity to, well, that stuff's very late game. The question of, did Isaac make it, is not going to be answered for a long time.
Right.
But we do have a couple new characters that are going to be really important. Esther Adams is kind of the main character of Volume 7. She's a young 15-year-old black girl who's ends up in this small town in Iowa when the night falls for reasons of her own. and is taken in by a kind of town pariah named Nurasamad. And then there is a character named Charlie Bush, who is also going to be an important one, and Nurasamad herself is going to be important. And yeah, there's just not a lot there's not a lot else I can say. Let's see, there's, in terms of the overarching journey, I think I know we're gonna get some time on the Great Lakes. There's gonna be a period of this story. I think the title for that volume will be Midnight Voyage, and it'll be a great journey across this, because all the Great Lakes connect, and they have these little straits that run through towns, little canals and stuff. So it's talking of like a couple thousand miles probably to do all of it. But the possibility of doing that would be appealing to John, who likes to take the back roads, and there's nothing more back road, and probably in John's mind, than let's get on a boat and not set foot on land. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be all sorts of dangers on the way. It's just risk management, right? So you're trying to take the one with the least possible risk, and it's still terribly risky because there's nowhere that's safe. So there'll be a lot of fun and excitement. We might see all sorts of things. You're gonna see all sorts of things. But yeah.
Great. Well, Daniel, those are all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
Not that I can think of. I mean, I'm here to answer your questions and anybody else's questions that might have any. I mean, Leslie's kind of a Nightmareland veteran, so she probably, and I'm always in her inbox sending her stuff and stuff, so she probably doesn't have any questions yeah. And Leslie, pardon me, you were right to wait too. I'm glad you waited on Blind Spots, because I did a lot of revising. It's about 7,000 words shorter now than it was when I finished that first draft. So it's 75 instead of 82. Yeah. I mean, I've really enjoyed reading all of your reviews, Kate. It's meant a whole lot to me. I love the way you break down your reviews, and of course, it's been really nice, seeing that you connected with the story and the characters and all that. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today, Daniel.
Absolutely.
Get back to work on Blind Spot, because we need those books coming now.
Oh yeah. Well, Blind Spots is on its. I just finished the second draft, and it's going to my editor in February. I guess this is probably something I can answer for people in terms of where I'm at. My hope, expectation, plan, what have you, is 2024 is going to be maybe even the end of 2023. But into 2024 is kind of dedicated to the Nightmareland audiobooks that are coming. The first one is finished. Just have to get the one unified file for all the chapter, for the book, and upload it and do all that stuff. And ideally, I will be able to release The Shadow over Harbrook Hill in 2024 as well too, which is, I think, a horror thriller that people are really going to enjoy. It's a lot of fun. That said, I am in a little bit of a conflict right now because I am working on revising that, but there are a couple places that require that it's not like just like cleaning up typos kind of draft.
Right.
There's some stuff that I need to work on there, and my heart is calling me towards volume 8 right now. So might be that book doesn't come out in 2024 if I can't actually like strike that immediate emotional connection to rebuild a couple things. But in any case, 2024, we're looking at the audiobooks. By the end of 2024, they should all be out. And then probably early 2025, I will release an omnibus edition of the first 6 books in the Nightmareland Chronicles as a way to help people catch up and or revisit if they want to before the new ones come underway. It's my sincere hope that by that time I will be done with by 2025 I will be done with volume 8 and maybe more, or just some way down the road, right? And then so 2025 I'm looking at like a spring release probably for the omnibus, and maybe a fall release for Blind Spots and the Underden sometime after that. The Underden I have not written yet. That's volume 8. But and then at that point in time, I release scheduled that just kind of when they're ready. Some of the books have more of a like volume 7 and 8. I want to not come out too far apart, but there could be a wider gap between 8 and 9 because 7 ends on like more of a just the way certain like books are companions. Like I see Lullaby as like Lullaby and Sleepwalking are like companion novels or whatever, because they're very wrapped around like this like part of the journey that belongs to Maria and Marcos predominantly. And like volume 4 and 5 are companion novels too. It's like all wrapped around the flashlighters and this particular stretch through Utah and so on and so forth. And that journey. That said, so like in that same vein, but maybe even more pronounced, volume 7 and 8 are like gonna be kind of pretty interlocked. But then volume 9 might represent like kind of like a sort of a new part of the journey again.
Yeah.
And pair off with 10, and then 11 and 12 are like the Go Town finale business books.
So you hear that, Leslie? 2025 we'll do our reread. She's laughing right now. She's already got 2025 scheduled out.
Oh, does she? Well, you can always I don't know if you like audiobooks, Kate, but
yes,
those might be a pretty good way to read.
Absolutely. I'm super excited for Adam Gold's narration of this series.
Oh, it's so good.
Amazing job of it.
Some of the side characters that he does too are just like Rick Lott is just the sleaziest piece of shit. Like I love his voice for Rick Lott. It's so good. And the encore guy is terrifying. And Matthew Crowder, when his mind is all shattered at the end of that first book, is just he's intense. Like totally different Matthew than the Matthew leading up to that moment. It'll be really interesting. I mean I can't wait to get more. He says we're gonna be get into Lullaby this month here, and
awesome.
It's not the right time to release a book right now, in my opinion, if one can help it. So I'll probably hold off on releasing the Nightmareland audiobook a little bit, but that doesn't mean I won't be sending out like review copies if I can figure out how to do that. Audiobook's just a brand new world for me, so I have to figure things out, learning process. Right. But yeah.
Well, we are super excited for that and the rest of the series.
Cheers. Well, it means a whole lot to me.
Thank you again for joining us tonight. And anyone that is watching this back, feel free to add your questions for Daniel in the comments on the video, and I will get them over to him and we'll get you some answers. Thank you all for watching. Thank you again, Daniel, for joining, and I hope you all have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.